Hello again. How many of you are glad the Christmas season is over with? Anybody? How many of you are tired? How many of you are sick? Stay away. Just kidding. I know I'm sick of being sick. Our family's been sick for a while. But how many of you are feeling maybe a little anxious, maybe a little worn out, stressed out, burnt out maybe, distracted? Okay, I see you on your phones. Just kidding. maybe you're wishing you could go on vacation for an extended period of time, right? Like the rest of that aren't here. So I'm just kidding. Maybe you just want to take a vacation from your vacation, right? Maybe you wish that time would just slow down. Wish that there was more hours in a day, more time with family and friends, or you could just go one day where you can enjoy your warm cup of coffee without your kids bugging you. Right, moms? Or just simply wishing that the busyness and the hustle and bustle of life would just be less busy. Anybody ever feel that way? Anybody currently feeling that way? Okay. Everyone in our culture today is busy, aren't they? Everyone just seems like they're just always busy. Everything is just, there's always something taking place. Schedules are always full, right? You think about this. What is the first thing that we generally say in a response to when someone says, "How are you doing?" They say, "Hey, how are you?" And you're like, "I'm good. I'm busy," right? It's generally the first thing we say. I'm good. I'm busy. Okay? Our culture is busier than ever before. It seems like we're always in a hurry. We're doing one thing after another, going here, going there, adding one more thing to the schedule. College students are busy. Parents are busy. All adults are busy. Even us pastors are busy. You know, young students, teenagers, they're busy. They got they got homework and jobs and activities and church and clubs and all sorts of other things. And then because of that, the parents are busy, right? Students are more stressed out and anxious than they have ever have been before. In our culture today, busyness is literally causing us to have a lower quality of life because of anxiety and depression and stress and so on. So in a book I've recently read called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer, which I highly recommend you read, explains that this hurried way of life in our culture has become so hurried and fast that psychologists and mental health professionals are now diagnosing people with what they call hurry sickness. Anybody ever hear of it? One definition writes it as a behavior pattern characterized by continual rushing and anxiousness. Another one puts it as in which a person feels chronically short on time and so tends to perform various tasks faster and faster and gets flustered when encountering any kind of delay. In his book, John Mark Comer gives examples of what he thinks hurry sickness might be in someone's life. And so listen to some of these and see if maybe these ring true for you. Number one, counting the cars ahead of you so you can try to get in the shortest line at the stoplight. Number two, jumping from one line to the next at the grocery store trying to find the shortest line. Number three, rolling through the stop sign instead of coming to a complete stop. Number four, trying to beat the yellow light. I know you all do that one. Number five, trying to find the fastest moving lane in a traffic jam. Now, I think if we're all honest with ourselves, we all suffer from what they call hurry sickness, right? He also writes that in this digital age that we live in, and with iPhones and tablets and just this technology world, plays a huge part in this hurry sickness mentality. A recent study showed that the average iPhone user touches his or her iPhone 2,617 times a day. Android users, you're safe because they don't have any information on you. So, but he also goes on to write that most people don't even know how much time they have lost to being on their phones. The average person spends 2 to 4 hours just on internet use, not to mention the other 4 hours just on social media and so on. A quote by Dallas Willard, who was an American philosopher and Christian author. In his book, he said that hurry is a great spiritual enemy of, hurry is a great enemy of spiritual life in our day. And he says that you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And Corrie ten Boom says this, if the devil can't make you sin, he'll make you busy. The point that John Mark Comer is making is that hurry and busyness and distractions is becoming a toxic way of life for many in our culture today. And it's affecting not only our lives, but our souls as well. The problem with our busy and distracted lives is for most of us is that we wish we just had more time. If I could just have an extra hour, I could get more done. If I just had one more hour to spend with family and friends. But see, the issue isn't time. Because if we had more time, we would just fill it with more stuff. More education, or more Netflix, or more hobbies, or more other things that would distract us or keep us busy, and we would end up being more tired and more anxious than ever before. The one thing that we all value the most is the very thing we are starting to value the least. You see, the problem isn't time. The problem is learning to slow down with the time we do have for the things that matter most. And the answer for that is follow the ways of Jesus. And so this morning, I hope to unpack this for you and answer that question. Is how do we follow Jesus when life just seems so busy? So if you have your Bibles, you can open up to Matthew 11:28, 29 through 30, and that'll be our main text this morning. And it'll be up on the screen as well. And so listen to Matthew 11:28, 29 through 30, about what it says of an unhurried life. It says this, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." You see, oftentimes when we read this passage, I think we right away, we put it in this category of someone who is maybe tired or burnt out, going through a hard time, and it is. And it's exactly what it is. It's Jesus coming to our aid and making that burden lighter. But I also think that we miss the heart of what this passage is really saying, and I believe it's a picture of what it means to follow Jesus. It's an invitation. It's a calling from God saying, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And so if we look in the next line, it says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. It's an invitation of Jesus saying, come and slow down. These two words, yoke and learn, are what I want to focus on today, because you see, a yoke, if you know what a yoke is a wooden crosspiece that is fastened over the necks of two oxen, and that is attached to a plow or cart that they pull behind. And the whole purpose of this is to shoulder that load, to make the load easier and lighter. But when we think of a yoke, especially in this context maybe, that I could easily see how someone would say, why is Jesus saying we should take up a yoke? Why should I take a yoke? Why should I take something that is going to require more work? Or why should I do something that is going to make me work? Why should I take a yoke? You see, yokes are used for farming, right? And getting things done, and it takes work. And this verse is supposed to be about what? Jesus giving us a lighter load, right? But what we don't often realize is that what Jesus is offering here is not more work or something more we have to carry, but a new way to carry life. An easier, freer life. Our lives are always going to have heavy loads, right? There's going to be always busy seasons ahead. Stressful times, moment that will always require something that only God can give. So that's why God offers equipment. He offers a tool, a resource, himself, a yoke. Jesus is offering an invitation to allow him to be a part of your life for whatever it is that you're going through. And he wants to give you something to help guide you through it. He doesn't say it's going to be easy, right? And it may not even seem lighter, but it definitely will be better. What Jesus is saying is, come to me and follow me and learn from me, and if you do, I will show you the way to live your life. And Dallas Willard called this the easy yoke. He wrote this about in Matthew 11. He said, "In this truth lies the secret to the easy yoke. The secret involves living as Jesus lived in the entirety of his life, adopting his overall lifestyle. Our mistake is to think of that following Jesus consists in loving our enemies and going the second mile and turning the other cheek, suffering patiently and hopefully while living the rest of our lives just like everyone else around us does. It's a strategy bound to fail." See, many of us want to follow Jesus. Many of us would say we want to live our life like that of Jesus. But sadly, we're not willing to adopt the full lifestyle of Jesus. We're not willing to bear the full image of Christ's likeness in our lives. And so part of this invitation from Jesus is not just about him shouldering that load and being right there with us, but it's an invitation to follow him, to learn from him, to grow, to be essentially an apprentice of Jesus. If you read the rest of the verse, it says, "Take my yoke," and then it says, "Learn from me, because I am gentle and humble in heart." Following Jesus means we need to learn from him. In his book, Elimination from Hurry, he uses the term apprentice or apprenticeship when referring to following Jesus. In other words, we could just say a disciple. I've really grown to liken this word when he was referring to following Jesus, because an apprentice is what? Someone who is learning, who is modeling after another person, following the practices of what they do. And follower of Jesus or disciple is essentially that, or at least it should be, right? Someone who is following the ways of Jesus, practicing his every move, learning his habits, being with Jesus, studying his word, seeing how he did things and didn't do things, being in prayer, then living their life the same way he did. That's what a follower of Jesus looks like. So when Jesus is saying here, he's saying, "Take my yoke and learn from me," he's not saying, just say, "Hey, give me your stuff and your garbage and go on your way. I'll be here when you return." He's saying, "No, come to me and learn from me. Step into my life. Walk with me. Let me show you the way. Let me teach you my way so you don't have to go through it alone. So you don't make the same mistakes over again. In other words, follow me." That's the easy yoke that Dallas Willard is referring to. And John Mike Comer says that if you want to experience the life of Jesus, you have to adopt the lifestyle of Jesus. How many of you can say that you have adopted the lifestyle of Jesus? When we adopt the lifestyle of Jesus, our burdens become lighter. Our trials become less trialsome. Our anxiety weakens, and the depression doesn't seem so depressing. Because Jesus is there to take our load, to pick us up, to give us the strength and the power through his Spirit to walk in the ways of Jesus. So that in the end, we can become mature and complete, not lacking anything. And what we become is essentially the image bearers of the King, made in the image of God, a reflection of who he is. How many of you are loving and patient with your kids when you are running late somewhere? How many of you are loving when you're stuck in a traffic jam and you're late for your appointment or work? Right? Chances are, if you're anything like me, you've had often moments of impatience and not so loving moments with your kids and other people because you're hurried or running late. But if we adopt the lifestyle of Jesus, the next time we are in a rush, we might respond in a different way. We might respond the way Jesus would, with a more patient and an unhurried, loving attitude. As we read the Gospels, we would see that Jesus was busy, yes, but often with a full plate, much like us, but he was never hurried. There was many times throughout the Gospel where Jesus was busy or caught in a moment that would bring panic or anxiety to many of us. And we see in Luke 8 where Jesus was walking through a large crowd on his way to heal a little girl who was dying. But on his way, he was stopped by a woman who touched his garment. And she was healed. And Jesus noticed this, and so he stopped and he talked to the woman. But meanwhile, he noticed that he still had to be somewhere, and this little girl was dying and literally on her deathbed. But yet he decided to take his time and still get to know this person. Another one in Matthew 8, when Jesus and his disciples were caught in a storm, his disciples were freaking out because the storm was too much for them to bear. And so they turned to look for Jesus for help, and as they do, they notice Jesus is sleeping in the back of the boat. Many times Jesus was busy and had a full schedule, but in the midst of all that, he was never hurried. He was never stressed out and panicking to get it all done. Jesus was busy, but through all the busyness, through all the chaos, Jesus was able to cope. He was able to find a healthy balance between dealing with people and having a life of meaning. He found a way to keep a level head, to slow down and keep the main thing the main thing. And so if we want to adopt the lifestyle of Jesus, we need to slow down and we need to learn to follow Jesus in his ways. See, Jesus was much like this. He was constantly being surrounded by people, constantly being questioned and pulled in different directions, and because everyone wanted to get a glimpse of who he was. People wanted healing. People wanted to hear his teachings. People just wanted to be with him. And rarely Jesus had time to be alone. In Mark 10, Jesus is coming back from Capernaum, and as he enters Judea, he crosses over the Jordan, and large crowds are literally waiting for him. In Matthew 8, Jesus was coming down the mountain from being alone, and large crowds are waiting for him at the bottom. And over again, Jesus was surrounded by crowds, and he was like a modern-day celebrity. People always following him, paparazzi wanting to get his every move. Jesus was constantly surrounded by people. But yet, through all the busyness and the chaos, Jesus always found time for what mattered most, to escape the busyness and the craziness of life. We see a couple of these in the Gospels where Mark 1:35, very early in the morning, while it was dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place. In Luke 5:16, but Jesus often withdrew to a lonely place and prayed. Matthew 14:23, after he had sent them away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. Many times Jesus would get away by himself to be in an isolated place, to get away from the busyness of his life. In Matthew 4, we read that Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. Have you ever wondered why Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness? Why he had to spend 40 days and 40 nights fasting and being tempted by the devil? You know, for the longest time, until just recently, I always thought it was kind of weird that the Spirit would lead Jesus into the wilderness, right? And if you're, if you read this verse and think, man, why would he do that? Why would Jesus do why? That's a horrible thing, right? To be stranded in a desert, no food. Why would God allow something like that to happen? It was because in the wilderness is where Jesus would be at his best. It was in those isolated moments that Jesus had the best opportunity to grow in his spiritual walk. It was in those isolated moments where God began to bring clarity to his calling in life. It was in those isolated moments where the Spirit of God's power would fill him up. It was in those isolated moments that after hours of prayer and abiding in God, Jesus knew he had the best chance to fight the devil. It was in those isolated moments that Jesus knew he had in order to handle the busyness of his life. It was in those isolated moments that he knew he had to have in order to serve people well, in order to love well, in order to preach the best sermons. Because it was in those moments where Jesus wasn't at his weakest. It was where he was at his strongest. It was where Jesus got restored, where he got refreshed, where he found rest and spiritual renewal for his soul, where his spiritual life found the most growth. And we see this take place actually in the Old Testament with the Israelites, where they're in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, right? And they're complaining, right? If you know the story, they're complaining about what? The manna, right? About not having a lack of food. And I think it's funny is because if you look at the Greek word of maybe desert, there's lots of meanings for this word. And some of those meanings are solitary place, lonely place, quiet place, wilderness. But the interesting thing about this is that the Israelites, even though they're complaining about being stranded in the desert, it was in that place where they grew the most in their relationship with God. And the more Jesus' days got busier and busier, the more he spent more time with God. That's when he relied on God the most. That's when Jesus would slow down and find a quiet place to pray. But for us, we do the complete opposite, don't we? When life gets busy and stress builds and people want our time and the chaos is at all-time high, the first thing to usually go is what? Church, youth group, Bible studies, small groups, prayer meetings, our relationship with God. You see, the same is true for us. The time we spend alone with God is where we become our best, where God restores our souls. It's in those moments of solitude we get our hearts and minds back in alignment with what's really important in life. It's in those moments of solitude that our spiritual lives grow the most, where the hustle and bustle of the life seems less important. Sometimes we get so busy and so distracted in life and just totally off kilter that we don't even know who we are anymore. And so that's why Jesus says to come. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. See, what Jesus is saying is, I know your life is busy. I know it's stressful and maybe a little chaotic, and I know what you need. So take my yoke, find my rest, and bring nourishment for your souls by spending time with me. See, this is what Jesus is talking about when he says, come and learn from me. He's saying, come follow me. Come back to the one who gave you life. Let me restore you and refresh you. Abide in me. John 15, 5-6 says, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you're like a branch that is thrown away and withers, and such branches are picked up and thrown into the fire and burned. See, this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where life takes shape, where we find balance, where we find peace, where we slow down and we rest in him, where we find strength to get through each day. This is where Jesus comes in and restores our souls so that we become the image bearers he desires us to be. This is how we follow the ways of Jesus. In his book, he uses an example of what is called a trellis, which if you know what a trellis is, it's often a light wooden piece of framework or sometimes metal bars and used as a support for fruit trees or climbing plants in a garden. And essentially a structure that holds up the vines so that they can grow and bear fruit. So he uses the example of a trellis when referring to our time that we spend with Jesus. A trellis gives structure, it gives balance, and it's the focal point to how we spend our time. Because the trellis is the foundation. It's the centerpiece to how your life operates. In other words, if Jesus and his word is not the foundation of your life, and if you're not taking the time to abide in him and slow down and find rest for your souls, how will you be able to be an apprentice of Jesus? How will you be able to follow him? John Ortberg says, you cannot live for the kingdom of God with a hurried soul. Both sin and busyness cut off your connection to God. Just like in John 15, it says, if you don't remain in me, you're like a branch who withers up and dies. If we don't have God as our foundation, as our trellis, we will not produce the fruit that God desires, and we will eventually wither away. See, following the way of Jesus has to become a priority in our life, or it will never happen. And so the point that John Mark Comer is making is that most of us in our culture today are just too busy to follow Jesus. And so the question I have for you this morning is, are you? Are you too busy to follow Jesus?